The baby's eyes opened for the first time in 3 days, and Jared Hawthorne felt his entire world tilt sideways. Storm gray eyes. His eyes, the exact same shade that stared back at him every morning from the shaving mirror, the same eyes his father had carried, and his grandfather before him. Those distinctive Hawthorne eyes that everyone in 3 counties could recognize on sight. Mr. Hawthorne? The woman's voice was barely above a whisper, weak and trembling from the fever that had gripped her since the birth. Is my son all right? Jared's throat went tight as he looked down at the tiny infant cradled in his large, calloused hands, then back to the pale face of Catherine Walsh watching him from bed. She'd arrived at his ranch just 2 weeks ago, desperate and alone, her belly swollen with child and a thin gold band on her finger that looked like it had come from a pawn shop. A widow, she'd said. Her husband had died in a mining accident outside Denver, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby on the way. He'd been reluctant to hire her. A pregnant woman had no business cooking for a ranch full of rough cattlemen. But his foreman Pete had pulled him aside with that look in his eye, the one that said Jared was being a stubborn fool. She'll work for just room and board until the baby comes, Pete had argued. After that, we'll see. But look at her, boss. She won't last another week on her own. So Jared had given in, telling himself it was just temporary charity, nothing more. He'd lost his own wife, Sarah, 3 years back during childbirth, along with the son he'd never gotten a hold. The last thing he needed was a pregnant woman under his roof, stirring up memories he'd worked hard to bury. But Catherine had kept to herself, worked harder than she should have in her condition, and never once asked for anything beyond what he'd offered. Now, staring down at this newborn boy with impossible eyes, Jared realized Catherine Walsh had been hiding a secret far bigger than he could have imagined. He's fine, Jared finally managed to say, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Strong and healthy. You did good. Catherine's eyes fluttered closed in relief, and for a moment Jared thought she'd fallen back asleep. The fever had been brutal. Doc Morrison had ridden out from town yesterday, done what he could, and warned Jared that the next 24 hours would tell the tale. Women died from childbed fever all the time. Jared had sat up through the night, the baby sleeping in a dresser drawer lined with blankets, watching Catherine's face for any sign that she was slipping away like Sarah had. He couldn't let that happen again. Wouldn't survive it again. The baby made a small sound, somewhere between a whimper and a sigh, and Jared instinctively adjusted his hold, supporting the tiny head the way Doc Morrison had shown him. He delivered this child himself 2 nights ago, his hands shaking the entire time, terror flooding through him as Catherine's screams filled the small room above the kitchen where she'd been staying. Pete had sent one of the hands racing to town for the doctor, but the storm had made the roads nearly impassable. By the time help could arrive, it was over. The baby had come fast and furious, slipping into Jared's unprepared hands with a sharp cry that had sounded like an accusation. He'd cut the cord with trembling fingers, wrapped the infant in clean towels, and placed him in Catherine's arms while his heart hammered against his ribs. She'd looked down at her son with such fierce love that something in Jared's chest had cracked open despite his best efforts to keep it sealed shut. That had been 2 days ago. 2 days of caring for both of them while trying to run a ranch and pretend his world wasn't slowly spinning out of control. 2 days of watching this woman who'd shown up on his doorstep with a lie on her lips and desperation in her eyes. 2 days of wondering what the hell he was going to do when she was strong enough to leave, taking this baby with her. Except now the baby had opened his eyes and everything had changed. Mr. Hawthorne? Catherine's voice came again, pulling him from his thoughts. Her eyes were open now, fever bright and anxious. You're holding him like something's wrong. Please tell me the truth. Jared looked at her, really looked at her for maybe the first time since she'd arrived. She was probably close to his own age, maybe 28 or 30, with dark blonde hair plastered to her forehead with sweat and cheekbones that stood out too sharp from weight she couldn't afford to lose. There was something familiar about her face, something that tickled at the edges of his memory, but he couldn't quite grasp it. "Nothing's wrong with him," Jared said slowly, choosing his words with care. "He's perfect. Then why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" "Because I have," Jared thought. "I'm looking at a ghost of myself." He moved closer to the bed, still holding the baby, and angled the infant so Catherine could see his face clearly. "When's the last time you really looked at his eyes?" Catherine frowned, confusion crossing her features. "They've been closed since he was born. Babies don't open their eyes right away. I thought that was normal." "It is normal," Jared confirmed. "But he opened them just now. Take a good look." Catherine stared down at her son, and Jared watched her face change as understanding slowly dawned. The color drained from her already pale cheeks, and her breathing quickened in a way that had nothing to do with fever. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh no, you weren't supposed to notice. Not yet. Not until I was gone." The admission hit Jared like a fist to the gut. "You knew. You knew he'd have my eyes." Catherine's gaze snapped up to meet his, and he saw fear there, raw and real. "I can explain. I think you'd better." Jared's voice came out hard, but he kept his hold on the baby gentle. Whatever else was true, this child was innocent. Catherine struggled to sit up, wincing with pain, and Jared found himself automatically reaching out to help her, propping pillows behind her back with his free hand. She took the baby from him, holding her son close as if he might be taken away at any moment. Smart woman. The thought had definitely crossed Jared's mind. "I wasn't always a widow," Catherine said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "That was a lie. I figured that much out on my own," Jared replied, crossing his arms over his chest. "What I haven't figured out is how that baby has hawthorn eyes when I've never met you before in my life." But even as the words left his mouth, something shifted in his memory. A night in Denver, maybe 9 or 10 months back. He'd closed a major cattle deal, the biggest of his career, and the buyers had insisted on celebrating. There'd been whiskey, lots of it, more than he'd drunk since Sarah died. The hotel bar had been loud and crowded, and there'd been a woman, a serving girl, bringing drinks, smiling at him in a way that had made him feel alive for the first time in years. He'd been too drunk to remember her face clearly, too drunk to remember much of anything about that night, beyond waking up alone in his hotel room with a pounding headache and a sense of shame that had followed him all the way home. Catherine was watching him now, and he saw the moment she realized his memory was returning. Her arms tightened around the baby. "Denver," Jared said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The cattle auction. You were there." "I worked at the hotel," Catherine confirmed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I brought drinks to your table that night. You were celebrating, and you were kind to me. Kinder than most men were. When you invited me upstairs, I said yes. I knew it was wrong, but I said yes anyway." Jared felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "I don't remember." "I know. You were drunk. Very drunk. In the morning, you were gone. I never expected to see you again. But then I realized I was pregnant, and I lost my job, and I had nowhere to go. I remembered your name from the auction papers. Jared Hawthorne from the Lazy H Ranch outside Willow Creek, Colorado. So I came looking for you. Why didn't you tell me?" Jared demanded. "Why the lies about being a widow?" "Because I didn't want your charity," Catherine shot back, fire sparking in her fever-bright eyes. "I didn't want you to feel trapped or obligated. I just wanted to work, to keep my baby fed and safe, to be close to his father, even if he never knew. I planned to leave before he was old enough for anyone to notice the resemblance. That's the stupidest plan I've ever heard." "Maybe so, but it was all I had." Catherine's voice broke. "I'll leave as soon as I'm strong enough. I promise. You'll never have to see us again." The baby chose that moment to let out a wail, sharp and demanding, and Catherine automatically began to rock him, making soft shushing sounds that seemed to come from some deep instinct. Jared watched them, his mind racing, his heart pounding, his carefully ordered life crumbling around him. This was his son, his blood, his responsibility. And this woman, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, had carried that burden alone for 9 months. "We'll talk more when you're stronger," Jared finally said, backing toward the door. "Right now you need rest." "Mr. Hawthorne." "It's Jared," he interrupted. "I think we're past formalities, don't you?" He left before she could respond, closing the door quietly behind him. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes, trying to process everything that had just happened. A son. He had a son. The boy he'd thought he'd never have, delivered into his hands by a woman he couldn't remember in circumstances he couldn't undo. Through the closed door, he heard Catherine's voice, soft and melodic, singing a lullaby to their child. The fever must be getting worse because her words were starting to slur together, becoming nonsense. "Denver," she murmured. "I'm so sorry. The auction, you don't remember? Thomas needs his papa. Can't let him know. Have to leave." Jared's blood ran cold. The fever was definitely getting worse. He pushed away from the wall and headed downstairs to find Pete. They needed Doc Morrison back here now, storm or no storm. Because if Catherine Walsh died, Jared would be left alone with a newborn baby and questions that only she could answer. And he'd already lost too much to bear losing anything else. Doc Morrison arrived just after dawn, his horse lathered and breathing hard from the ride. Jared met him at the door, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in his body. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not with Catherine's fever climbing and the baby crying every few hours and his own mind spinning in endless circles. "She's worse," Jared said without preamble. "Delirious, talking out of her head." The doctor nodded grimly and headed upstairs, his medical bag in hand. Jared followed, dreading what they might find. But when they entered the room, Catherine's eyes were open and clearer than they'd been in hours. The baby was nursing, and she looked up at them with something like hope on her pale face. "The fever broke about an hour ago," she said softly. "I think the worst is past." Doc Morrison examined her anyway, checking her pulse and temperature, asking questions about pain and bleeding. Jared stood by the window, only half listening, his mind still caught on Catherine's delirious confession from the night before. "Denver, the auction. You don't remember." But he was starting to remember. The memories were coming back in pieces, fragmentary and incomplete, like looking at a photograph that had been torn and badly reassembled. He'd been in Denver for the Western Cattlemen's Association auction, the biggest sale of the year. He bought breeding stock that would set his ranch up for the next decade, spent more money in one afternoon than most men earned in a lifetime. The other ranchers had insisted on celebrating at the Golden Eagle Hotel, and Jared had gone along because refusing would have been bad business. The whiskey had flowed freely, too freely. He'd drunk more that night than he had since Sarah's funeral, trying to drown the loneliness that followed him everywhere. There'd been a woman bringing drinks to their table, pretty, with sad eyes and a cautious smile. She'd laughed at something he said, a real laugh, not the forced politeness most serving girls offered. It had felt good to make someone laugh again. Later, when the other ranchers had stumbled off to their rooms, she'd still been there. He'd asked her name. "Catherine," she'd said. Just Catherine. He'd asked if she wanted a drink herself, and she'd said yes. They talked. About what? He couldn't remember. But he remembered the way she'd looked at him, like he was someone worth knowing instead of just another drunk cowboy with money to spend. He'd invited her upstairs. She'd hesitated, then agreed. The rest was a blur of whiskey-soaked images. Her hair spread across the pillow. The taste of her mouth. The warmth of her body against his. The feeling, just for a few hours, of not being completely alone. In the morning, shame had driven him from the bed before sunrise. He'd left money on the dresser, more than was necessary, and ridden out of Denver with a pounding headache and a promise to himself that he'd never let himself get that drunk again. He kept that promise, but apparently the damage had already been done. "Mr. Hawthorne?" Doc Morrison's voice pulled him back to the present. "I said she's going to be fine. The fever's broken, and if she rests and eats properly, she should recover fully." "That's good." Jared managed. That's real good. The doctor gave him a long look. You all right? You look like hell. Just tired. Been a long couple of days. I imagine so. Doc Morrison glanced at Catherine, then back to Jared. Delivering a baby isn't easy for anyone, especially not for a man who's lost what you've lost. But you did well. Mother and child are both healthy, thanks to you. After the doctor left, Jared stood in the doorway, uncertain whether to leave or stay. Catherine made the decision for him. We should talk, she said quietly. Now, while I have the strength and the courage. Jared closed the door and took the chair beside the bed. The baby had fallen asleep at her breast, tiny fist curled against her skin. Looking at them together, Jared felt something shift in his chest, some wall he'd built 3 years ago starting to crack. I remember Denver, he said. Not all of it, but enough. You worked at the Golden Eagle Hotel. Catherine nodded. I've been there 6 months. It was good work, better than most places. The owner treated his girls fairly, and the money was steady. She paused, adjusting the blanket around the baby. That night, you were different from the other man. You looked me in the eye when you talked to me. You asked my name and actually listened when I answered. That might not sound like much, but in that work, it meant everything. I took advantage of you, Jared said, the words like gravel in his throat. I was drunk, and I took advantage. No, Catherine said firmly. I made a choice. Maybe not a wise choice, but it was mine. I knew what I was doing. I just didn't know there would be consequences. You got pregnant. Yes. And when the owner found out, he fired me. Said he ran a respectable establishment and couldn't have pregnant girls serving drinks. Never mind that plenty of his customers were the reason girls ended up pregnant in the first place. Bitterness crept into her voice. I had a little money saved, but not enough. I tried to find other work, but no one wants to hire a woman who's expecting. I was running out of options. So you came looking for me. Catherine met his eyes. I remembered your name from the auction paperwork. Some of the other ranchers talked about you during dinner. Said you ran a good operation, treated your people fair. I thought maybe if I could just get hired on as a cook, I could work until the baby came. After that, I'd figure something out. I never planned to tell you the truth. I just wanted my son to know his father's land, even if he never knew his father. 3 days passed, and Catherine didn't leave. She was still too weak, she said. The baby needed stability. Just a few more days to get her strength back, and then she'd be gone. Jared told himself he was fine with that. Better even. His life was complicated enough without a woman and baby underfoot. But he kept finding excuses to check on them. Making sure Catherine was eating enough. Bringing fresh water. Checking that the fire in her room stayed lit through the cold September nights. And then there were the nighttime feedings. The first time the baby woke screaming at 2 in the morning, Jared had lain in his bed downstairs, trying to ignore it. Catherine was the mother. She could handle it. But the crying went on, and finally he'd gotten up and climbed the stairs, telling himself he just wanted to make sure everything was all right. He'd found Catherine sitting in the rocking chair, tears streaming down her face, the baby wailing in her arms. I can't, she'd whispered. I'm trying, but he won't latch, and I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Jared had stood there awkwardly, completely out of his depth. But then he'd remembered something Doc Morrison had said when Sarah was pregnant. Sometimes babies just needed to be held and rocked until they calmed down enough to eat. So he'd taken his son from Catherine's arms, walked him around the small room, and talked to him in a low, steady voice about nothing in particular. About the ranch, the cattle, the mountains in the distance. And miraculously, the baby had quieted. After that, it became routine. When Thomas cried at night, Jared would appear. He'd rock his son, change his diaper with fumbling but determined hands, and give him back to Catherine when he was ready to nurse. They didn't talk much during these midnight meetings, but something unspoken passed between them in the darkness. A partnership born of necessity, maybe, but a partnership nonetheless. During the day, Jared tried to keep his distance. He had a ranch to run, cattle to tend, men to supervise. Pete gave him knowing looks, but kept his opinions to himself. which Jared appreciated. The other hands had noticed the baby, of course, but they assumed he was exactly what Catherine had claimed, a widow's child. No reason to think otherwise. But on the fourth day, Jared came in for lunch and found Catherine in the kitchen. She was standing at the stove, stirring a pot of stew, the baby strapped to her chest in a sling she'd fashioned from an old shawl. She looked pale and tired, but there was determination in the set of her shoulders. "You should be resting," Jared said, frowning. "I've rested enough. I need to earn my keep." Catherine didn't look at him, just kept stirring. "Besides, I heard Pete telling the men that if they had to eat one more meal of his cooking, they were going to mutiny." Despite himself, Jared felt his mouth twitch. Pete's cooking was legendarily bad. Still, you just had a baby 4 days ago. "Women have been having babies and getting back to work since the beginning of time," Catherine replied. "I'm not special." But she was special, Jared thought. The realization hit him with uncomfortable force. She was special because she was brave and stubborn and determined to stand on her own 2 feet even when the world kept knocking her down. She was special because she looked at him without pity or calculation, just honest regard. And she was special because when she held their son, something in Jared's chest that had been frozen for 3 years started to thaw. He didn't like it, didn't want to feel anything. Feeling meant risk, and risk meant potential loss. And he'd already lost more than any man should have to bear. "The stew smells good," he said finally, backing toward the door. "It'll be ready in an hour." Catherine glanced at him then, just briefly. "There's coffee if you want some now." Jared poured himself a cup and sat at the kitchen table, telling himself he was just taking a break. That's all. But his eyes kept drifting to Catherine as she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, one hand steadying the baby while the other worked. She hummed while she cooked, some tune he didn't recognize, and Thomas made little contented sounds in response. "He likes your voice," Jared observed. Catherine smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "He's easily pleased. Give him a full belly and a warm place to sleep, and he's happy. Sounds like a smart kid. He gets that from his father." The words were out before Catherine seemed to realize what she'd said. Color flooded her cheeks. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," Jared interrupted. "He's my son. We both know it. No point pretending otherwise." Catherine turned to face him fully. "What happens now? I mean, after I'm strong enough to leave. Will you want to see him? Should I send letters, or—" She trailed off, uncertainty written across her face. Jared stared into his coffee cup, watching the steam rise. What had happened now? A week ago, his life had been simple. Now he had a son he'd never planned for and a woman under his roof who stirred feelings he'd thought long dead. The smart thing would be to let them go. Give Catherine money to get settled somewhere. Maybe arrange for regular payments to help with the boy's upkeep. Stay uninvolved. Stay safe. But when he looked at Thomas, sleeping peacefully against his mother's chest, Jared knew he couldn't do it. Couldn't let his son disappear into the world like he'd never existed. "I don't know what happens," Jared admitted, "but I know I can't watch you walk away and never see him again." Catherine's eyes widened. "You want to be part of his life. He's my son." The words felt right in Jared's mouth, solid and true. "I may not have planned for him, but he's here, and I don't abandon what's mine." Before Catherine could respond, the kitchen door burst open and Pete rushed in, his face flushed with alarm. "Boss, we got trouble. Mrs. Henderson from town just left. She saw the baby." Jared's stomach dropped. And she's got eyes in her head, same as everyone else. She asked me point blank if that child was yours, and I didn't know what to tell her." By sunset, the whole town knew. Mrs. Henderson had wasted no time spreading the news that Jared Hawthorne's new cook had given birth to a baby with unmistakable Hawthorne eyes. The same storm gray shade that marked every member of that family going back 3 generations. Jared sat in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched on the desk in front of him, listening to Pete relay the rumors that had already started circulating. "They're saying she trapped you, that she came here deliberate-like, knowing she was carrying your child. Pete shifted uncomfortably in his chair. They're saying worse things, too, about her character. Mrs. Henderson's telling everyone she was working at some hotel in Denver, and folks are drawing their own conclusions about what kind of work that was. She was a serving girl, Jared said flatly. Nothing more. I believe you, boss. But the town's not interested in the truth when gossip's more entertaining. Pete leaned forward. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Well, you'd better figure out quick. Pastor Reynolds is riding out here tomorrow morning. Says he needs to speak with you about your moral responsibility. Jared's jaw tightened. My moral responsibility is none of his damn business. Maybe not, but he's going to make it his business anyway. You know how he is. After Pete left, Jared climbed the stairs to check on Catherine and Thomas. He found Catherine sitting by the window, the baby in her arms, staring out at the darkening sky. She'd been crying. He could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, even though she'd clearly tried to wipe them away. You heard, Jared said. It wasn't a question. One of the ranch hands' wives came by this afternoon. She was kind about it, but she warned me that the town's talking. Said I should prepare myself for what's coming. Catherine's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she held Thomas. I've ruined you, just like I knew I would. You haven't ruined anything. Your reputation. My reputation can survive some gossip. Jared moved closer, standing beside the window. I'm more concerned about yours. And Thomas's. Catherine looked down at their son. I'll leave. Tomorrow if you want. Before this gets any worse. And go where? You have no money, no family, and a week-old baby. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? I'll figure something out. I always do. No. The word came out harder than Jared intended. You're not leaving. Not yet. Why not? Keeping me here only makes things worse for you. Because I don't want you to go, Jared thought. Because when I look at you holding our son, something in me feels right for the first time in years. Because the thought of you out there alone, struggling to survive, makes my chest tight with an emotion I'm not ready to name. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, because Thomas deserves better than to grow up hearing his mother made bad choices. He deserves a chance at a decent life. And staying here gives him that. Catherine's laugh was bitter. The whole town thinks I'm a fallen woman who trapped you into fatherhood. How is that decent? Before Jared could answer, they heard a horse approaching fast. He moved to the window and saw his sister Margaret riding up the drive, her face setting grim lines even from this distance. That's Margaret, he said, his stomach sinking. She must have heard. Your sister. Catherine's face went pale. Oh God, Jared, I can't face her. Not tonight. But there was no avoiding it. 5 minutes later, Margaret was standing in the doorway of Catherine's room, her traveling cloak still on and dust from the road covering her boots. She'd ridden 20 miles from her own ranch, and she looked furious. Is it true? Margaret demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. That woman had your baby? Her name is Catherine, Jared said evenly. And yes, Thomas is my son. Margaret's eyes swept over Catherine with barely concealed contempt. How convenient. A mysterious widow shows up at your door, pregnant and desperate, and suddenly you're a father. Did you even ask for proof before you claimed the child? I don't need proof, Jared replied. I have eyes. So do you, if you'd bother to look. Margaret moved closer to the bed, studying Thomas with a critical eye. The baby was awake, watching her with those distinctive gray eyes that had started all this trouble. Jared saw the moment his sister recognized them. Her expression shifted from anger to shock to something more complicated. Oh, Jared, she whispered. What have you done? What I did was 10 months ago in Denver, when I was drunk and lonely and not thinking straight. What I'm doing now is trying to figure out how to make this right. Margaret turned to Catherine. Did you plan this? Come here knowing you were pregnant with his child. Catherine lifted her chin, meeting Margaret's gaze directly. Yes, I came here knowing, but not to trap him or take his money. I just wanted to work and keep my baby safe. I never intended to tell him the truth. How noble, Margaret said sarcastically. And what do you intend to do now that the truth is out? Leave, Catherine said simply. As soon as I'm strong enough, I'll take Thomas and go. I won't cause your brother any more trouble. That's exactly what you should do. Margaret turned back to Jared. Let her go. Give her money to get settled somewhere else and let this scandal die down. In a few months, people will forget. But if you keep her here, if you acknowledge that child publicly, your reputation will be permanently damaged. You'll never be able to marry well, never be accepted in decent society again. I don't care about decent society. Well, you should. You're a Hawthorne. We have standards to maintain. Standards? Jared's temper finally snapped. What kind of standards say a man should abandon his own child? That's not the way Father raised us, and you know it. Margaret's face flushed. Father never had an illegitimate child with a hotel servant. The words hung in the air like a slap. Catherine flinched as if she'd been physically struck, and Jared saw tears spring to her eyes before she blinked them away. Get out, Jared said coldly. Jared, I said get out. You can stay tonight in the guest room since you rode all this way, but I want you gone in the morning. And don't come back until you can speak to Catherine with the respect she deserves. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. You're choosing her over your own family? I'm choosing to do what's right. Something you might try sometime. After Margaret left, slamming the door behind her, Jared turned to find Catherine crying silently, her shoulders shaking with the effort of keeping quiet so she wouldn't wake the baby. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Jared crossed the room and, without thinking, pulled her into his arms. She stiffened in surprise, then collapsed against his chest, crying harder. He held her, one hand gently rubbing her back, and wondered how everything had gotten so complicated so fast. That night, Catherine made her decision. She couldn't stay here, couldn't watch Jared's life crumble because of her mistakes. His own sister had turned against him. The town was talking. Soon, business partners would distance themselves, opportunities would dry up, and all because he'd been foolish enough to show her kindness. She waited until the house was quiet, until she was certain Jared had gone to bed. And she packed the few belongings she owned into a worn carpet bag, wrapped Thomas in every blanket she could spare, and crept down the back stairs. Her body protested every movement. It had only been a week since the birth, and she was still weak and sore. But weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. She made it to the barn before the tears started. Setting the bag down, she leaned against the stall door and let herself cry for everything she was losing. The safety she'd found here, the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. The way Jared looked at Thomas with such unexpected tenderness. The midnight feedings when they'd moved around each other in comfortable silence. Partners in caring for their son. She'd been a fool to think any of it could last. Going somewhere, Catherine spun around to find Jared standing in the barn doorway, fully dressed despite the late hour. He must have been watching, waiting for her to do exactly this. I have to leave, she said, wiping at her tears. You know I do. Actually, I don't know that at all. Jared moved closer, his eyes intense in the lantern light. Where exactly are you planning to go? You have no money, no family, and a week-old baby. It's October in Colorado. You wouldn't last 3 days on the road. That's not your concern. The hell it isn't. Jared's voice rose, frustration bleeding through. You're the mother of my child. That makes everything about you my concern. I won't let you sacrifice your reputation for us. Your sister made it very clear what keeping us here will cost you. Margaret doesn't speak for me. She never has. Catherine shook her head. It's not just her. It's the whole town. The pastor's coming tomorrow to lecture you about morality. How long before your business partners start questioning whether they want to deal with a man who's keeping a fallen woman under his roof? How long before every door in polite society closes to you? I don't give a damn about polite society. You should. You have a life here, a good life. I won't be the reason you lose it. Thomas stirred in her arms, making a small sound of protest at the raised voices. Catherine automatically rocked him, making soft shushing sounds, and Jared's expression softened as he watched them. "You want to know what I care about?" he said quietly. "I care about that boy having a roof over his head and food in his belly. I care about him knowing his father. And I care about you not having to struggle alone anymore." Those are all very noble concerns, but they don't change reality. The scandal will blow over eventually. Small towns move on to the next piece of gossip soon enough. But if you leave now, if you take Thomas and disappear, that's permanent. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if my son is warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. Is that what you want? Catherine's throat tightened. "No, but I don't want you to hate me either 5 years from now, when you realize what you've lost because of me." Jared stepped closer, so close she could see the storm gray of his eyes in the lamplight. The same eyes their son had inherited. "What if I asked you to stay? Not as the cook, as my wife." The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She actually took a step backward, shaking her head. "No, absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because marriage should be about love, not obligation. Because I won't trap you into a lifetime commitment just because we made a mistake in Denver. Because you deserve better than a wife you're stuck without a duty." "What makes you think it would be a trap?" Jared's voice was low, intense. "What makes you think I haven't spent the last week watching you with our son and realizing that maybe what happened in Denver wasn't a mistake at all? Maybe it was the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I was too drunk to remember it properly." Catherine stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "You don't mean that." "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Jared continued. "Lost her and the baby both. I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd just work the ranch until I died, and that would be the whole of my life. But then you showed up, and everything changed. You're strong, Catherine. Stronger than anyone gives you credit for. You survived things that would have broken most people, and you did it while protecting our son. That's not something I take lightly. Strength doesn't make me a suitable wife. The town will never accept me. Your family certainly won't. Margaret will come around. She's stubborn, but she's not cruel. And as for the town, they'll accept what I tell them to accept. I'm Jared Hawthorne. My family built half this county. If I say you're my wife and Thomas is my legitimate son, who's going to argue?" "Everyone will argue," Catherine said, but her resolve was weakening. "They'll know the timeline doesn't add up. They'll know we weren't married when I got here. So we'll say we were married in Denver. Quietly, because I was still grieving Sarah and didn't want to fuss. You took my name, came west to the ranch, and here we are. Simple. That's a lie. It's a lie that protects our son. And if we get married now, make it legal and proper, it stops being a lie. It becomes the truth, just slightly rearranged." Catherine looked down at Thomas, who had fallen back asleep in her arms, peaceful and unaware of the conversation that would shape his entire future. She thought about what life on the road would mean for him. Cold nights, hunger, uncertainty, always moving, always hiding, always afraid. And she thought about what staying would mean. A father who wanted him, a home, stability, the chance at a normal life despite the circumstances of his birth. "I'm scared," she whispered. "What if you wake up one day and regret this? What if you look at me and only see the mistake we made?" Jared reached out and gently cupped her face with his hand, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Then we'll work through it. Together. That's what marriage is, isn't it? Working through the hard parts together." "I don't love you," Catherine said, needing him to understand. "Not yet. I barely know you." "I don't love you either," Jared replied honestly. "Not yet. But I could. I can feel it starting like ice thawing after a long winter. Can't you?" Catherine closed her eyes, and yes, she could feel it. The warmth that spread through her chest when Jared smiled at Thomas. The comfort of his presence during those midnight feedings. The way her heart had lifted when he defended her to his sister. It wasn't love yet, but it was something. Something that could grow into love, given time and nurturing. "If we do this," she said slowly, "it has to be a real marriage. A real partnership. I won't be some kept woman you're stuck with. I wouldn't want you any other way." And if it doesn't work, if we try and fail, then at least we tried. At least Thomas will have had both his parents fighting for him. Jared's hand moved to rest gently on their son's head. What do you say, Catherine? Will you marry me? Catherine whispered yes into the quiet barn, and Jared kissed her. It was soft and careful, a promise more than passion. And when they pulled apart, Catherine was crying again. But this time, they were tears of relief. The next morning, Pastor Reynolds arrived as expected, his face set for a lecture. He found Jared and Catherine sitting together in the parlor, Thomas sleeping in a cradle between them, and the announcement that stopped him cold. We're getting married. Jared said simply, this Sunday, if you're available to perform the ceremony. The pastor blinked in surprise. I see. Well, that's certainly the right course of action, but the timing will raise questions. The child is clearly already born. We were married in Denver, Catherine said, her voice steadier than she felt. Quietly, because Jared was still mourning his first wife. I came west afterward, and here we are. Pastor Reynolds looked skeptical, but Jared met his gaze without flinching. Are you going to marry us or not? Of course I'll marry you. Sunday it is. After he left, Jared squeezed Catherine's hand. First hurdle cleared. The second hurdle came that afternoon when Margaret returned. She stood on the porch, her expression unreadable, and asked if she could see the baby. Catherine almost refused, still stinging from the previous night's cruelty, but Jared nodded encouragement. Margaret sat stiffly in the chair, and Catherine placed Thomas in her arms. The baby stirred, opened his eyes, and looked up at his aunt. Then, for the first time since his birth, Thomas smiled. A real smile, bright and beautiful, that transformed his tiny face. Margaret's stern expression crumbled. Oh, she breathed. Oh, he is father's smile. Look at that, Jared. He is father's smile. He does, Jared agreed quietly. Margaret looked up at Catherine, tears in her eyes. I was cruel to you last night. I'm sorry. I was trying to protect my brother, but I was wrong about what he needs protecting from. He needs family, and so does this little one. May I come to the wedding? Catherine felt her own tears rising. Yes, please. The wedding was small but beautiful. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that one of the ranch wives had altered to fit her. Jared wore his best suit, and Thomas slept peacefully in Margaret's arms throughout the ceremony. Pete stood as witness, grinning like he'd planned the whole thing himself. When Pastor Reynolds pronounced them husband and wife, Jared kissed Catherine with more confidence than their first kiss in the barn. It felt like a beginning. The town slowly came around. Some people remained scandalized, but most decided that at least the Hawthorns were doing right by the child. Mrs. Henderson kept whispering, but her audience dwindled when folks realized there were more interesting things to discuss than old news. The first months of marriage were awkward. Jared and Catherine circled each other carefully, learning how to be partners. They disagreed about silly things like how to arrange the kitchen or whether the bedroom window should be open at night. But they learned to compromise, to laugh at themselves, to choose kindness over being right. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It happened in small moments. The way Jared brought Catherine coffee every morning without being asked. The way Catherine laughed at his terrible jokes. The way they moved together during Thomas's nighttime wake-ups. A synchronized dance born of practice and growing affection. The way Jared's hand would find Catherine's under the dinner table, just to hold it. One night, 6 months after the wedding, they lay in bed after putting Thomas down. Jared was tracing lazy patterns on Catherine's arm, and she turned to face him. I love you, she said. Simple as that. No fanfare, no perfect moment, just the truth. Jared smiled, that slow smile she'd come to cherish. I love you too. Have for a while now, actually. Why didn't you say anything? Was waiting for you to catch up. He kissed her forehead. Didn't want to rush you. I'm caught up now. Good, Jared murmured, pulling her closer. Because I'm planning on keeping you for a very long time. Spring brought new life to the ranch and new life to the Hawthorne family. Catherine discovered she was pregnant again, And this time, Jared was there from the beginning. He fussed over her constantly, driving her crazy with his concern, but she loved him for it anyway. Their daughter was born in July, a smooth delivery with Doc Morrison in attendance and Jared holding Catherine's hand throughout. They named her Sarah, after Jared's first wife, because Catherine insisted that the woman who'd come before deserved to be remembered and honored. Margaret cried when she heard the name. "You're a good woman, Catherine Hawthorne. Better than I gave you credit for at first." Thomas took his first steps that summer, toddling across the parlor floor into Jared's waiting arms. He was talking now, calling Jared Papa and Catherine Mama, and those storm gray eyes were always bright with curiosity and joy. One evening, as Catherine nursed baby Sarah while Jared played with Thomas on the floor, she looked around their home and felt overwhelming gratitude. A year ago, she'd been desperate and alone, making a foolish journey west with nothing but hope. Now she had everything she'd never dared to dream of. "What are you thinking?" Jared asked, noticing her expression. "That I'm happy," Catherine said simply. "That I love our life." Jared stood, scooped up Thomas, and came to sit beside her on the sofa. Their little family, complete and whole. "Me too," he said, kissing her temple. "Me too." That night, after the children were asleep, Jared held Catherine close and thought about the journey that had brought them here. A drunken night in Denver that he'd regretted for months. A desperate woman showing up on his doorstep with secrets. A baby's eyes that had changed everything. People in town still talked sometimes, speculating about the real timeline of events. But Jared didn't care. Let them talk. He had his family, his home, and a wife he loved more each day. The past was complicated and messy, but the present was beautiful. And the future? The future was theirs to build together, one day at a time. Those storm gray eyes that had shocked him awake that first morning now watched him with pure love. Thomas's eyes, so like his own, looking up at him with complete trust. It was more than Jared had ever hoped for, more than he'd thought possible after losing Sarah. Catherine had given him that. Not just a son, but a second chance at happiness. A second chance at love. A second chance at being the man he wanted to be. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" "For being brave enough to come here. For giving me Thomas. For giving us a chance." Catherine smiled against his chest. "Thank you for seeing past my mistakes. For choosing us. Always," Jared promised. "I'll always choose us." And he meant it. Through all the years that followed, through joys and sorrows, through the 5 more children they'd eventually have, through building a legacy that would last generations, Jared Hawthorne kept that promise. He always chose them, his family, his love, his second chance.